All righty, I guess we can go on and get started. If you're still eating, go right ahead and keep eating, and go get more if you want it. But for the evening, we're going to get to our question. The question that was put to me was something to the effect of, what, if any, meaning do we attach to what's happening in Israel now as it fits into the general scheme of prophecy? You may not like my answers. You may disagree with what I have to say. That's fine. I've said many times, it's America. You can be wrong if you want to, and I don't mind one bit. The position I take is probably the majority opinion on such matters, and the answer is what credit do I give to what's happening over there with regard to end times? Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. So we're going to ponder this question a little bit, and we're going to ask the question of Israel, what we would call Israel. In ancient times, at least for a period of 300 years or so, 400 years, it was about 600 years. It was Israel and Judah, the northern and southern kingdom. So it was a divided kingdom. Who was that? What did God exactly do with them and promise to them? And what is Israel today? Who is the true Israel? And so we're going to look at that, think about it, and look at some biblical passages. And at least I'll challenge you to think. You can think what you want to, and if you don't agree with me, at least I'm giving you some food for thought, okay? With that, let's talk about Israel. Israel entered a covenant with God. Or rather, God entered a covenant with Israel. But it's both are right, because a covenant is a two-way street. What is a covenant? Anybody got an opinion? What is a covenant? A promise. Contract. It's a contract. In ancient times, what professors or scholars today call a suzerainty treaty, there was, when you read history, even of Israel itself, that there is a whole lot of one country becoming an empire and then going in and capturing another country, but not taking it over, allowing them to continue to do what they want to do and govern themselves with some parameters, so long as they paid a tribute, a tax. Alexander did it. His followers did it. His successors did it. The Romans did it. The Greeks did it. Whenever they took a new territory, they didn't go in with the idea that we're just going to bowl people over and not leave a greasy spot. They did it for power purposes, for empire purposes. They did it for riches. So if you take your army and you take over another country and render them powerless, then you have the reins when it comes to making a treaty. You're going to get to dictate the terms. And the other side is either going to have to accept them or reject them. And they always accepted them. That is more or less the way we should understand the covenant that God made with Abraham. God dictated the terms. God is the one who decided what to do. Abraham was the recipient of a promise from God and his followers when the covenant was renewed, his descendants. He was to become the father of a great nation if he and his followers did certain things. There were conditions that had to be met. Now, of course, Abraham is before the law, and we're going to talk primarily about the role that the law played in that. So we're going to skip right ahead to Moses, where the covenant was renewed. And there again, there was an offer, a promise of a land that was described as a land flowing with milk and honey. A good land, a land that where they and their descendants could settle and become a mighty nation. But there were conditions attached. What were the conditions attached to it? One primary one. I will give you this land if
You will serve me.
serve me, and what else? No other gods. And keep my laws, right? If you want to check it out, look at Leviticus. Leviticus, let's see here. Got to find it. 18:4. Essentially it says, if you obey my commandments, the Lord will bless you in the land that you are about to enter. There were conditions. It wasn't a free gift. There were strings attached. There was always strings attached. And for Moses and the children of the Exodus, the promise was, I will give you this land, make you secure in this land, if you keep my commandments. If you don't worship other gods. What is the very, very first thing Israel did when they got in the new promised land? Yeah, and after that generation got, what started happening? They started worshiping other gods. And they did. They started worshiping other gods. And it even got so bad at one point in Israel's history to where there was actually a king on the throne who didn't really believe in the power of Jehovah God, but gave praise to Baal. They were idolaters from the very get-go. Not all of them. Here's another thing you got to take away from the Old Testament when you read it. There's always a judgment, but there will always be a remnant left over. It won't be all of you. It will be some of you. There will be a remnant left whenever God's punishment or wrath was going to come down on the nation Israel. It's a contract. If Israel does not keep its side of the bargain, what happens?
He sends in another group of people to take them over.
Well, yeah, essentially, but as to them, is God freed of his covenant if they don't keep? Look at Israel's history. We talk about them being in exile, but I want you to think, their golden age was under David, a man after God's own heart. And then came Solomon, and then Solomon's son, Rehoboam. And between some things that Solomon did in impressing the northern tribes for work on Jerusalem, and his even more oppressive son, the northern kingdom revolted. When Israel entered the promised land, there were 12 tribes. It was a confederacy. No one had power over the other. It was all voluntary. Your tribe volunteered, and this tribe volunteered, except on occasion when God would raise up a judge to lead Israel. And then when that was over, God's presence in that person's life decreased, and they went back to a normal life. There was no lasting ruler. They cried out for a king. They ended up with Saul, and then after Saul, David. After David, David's son Solomon. And after that, after Solomon's rule ended in 930 or 931, somewhere around in there, BC, the two nations divided. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom was Israel. The southern kingdom was Judah. 2 tribes in the south, 10 tribes in the north. They went their own way. They did their own thing. They entered treaties. They had wars. They fought with each other on occasion. And finally, a prophet named Amos came along around 800 BC and started prophesying that God was angry with the northern kingdom because they had set up false altars. They had not practiced the faith that God wanted them to practice. They had not been equitable. They had become rich by taking from the poor, and all sorts of accusations that were made against them. And so Amos brings the judgment or the prophecy on Israel that God is about to crush you. And you ask, will there be anything left? He said, maybe a corner of a couch or a piece of an ear when God gets through judging you. And lo and behold, in 722, what happened? Assyria came in, took Israel, and took its people and scattered them throughout the empire, separated them from having any central base that they could relate to, brought other people into where the Israelites had been, and after generation and generation and generation on down the line, you pretty much get what the Samaritans were in Jesus' day. They claimed the faith of Israel, but they weren't Israel. They were, according to the Israelites, they were a mixed race. Therefore, they weren't people of the covenant. Even though their heritage was Jewish, at least on one side, they weren't believed to be true children of Abraham, and so God's judgment was on them, and they wouldn't be included. Now, when those 10 tribes went away, where did they go? Do you find them anywhere else in the Bible? They're gone. Destroyed. The 10 lost tribes of Israel. So that left the southern kingdom, Judah, and their kings really most times fared a little better than the ones in the north. The covenant that the prophets would have had them understand, the kings of Judah, was that they should not run the country like a political entity, but like a spiritual entity. And to trust God to take them where they needed to go rather than trying to figure that out on their own. And inevitably, that's what they did. They tried to figure it out on their own. And the prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and some of the minor prophets prophesied against them and said, God's judgment is coming on you. God's judgment. And it seems like it's almost inescapable. It's going to happen. And it did. The Babylonians, with their massive empire, came in, and over a series of years, between 600 and 585 or so BC, they leveled Judah and Jerusalem. I've said many times, have you ever read Lamentations? Lamentations is written about the time of the siege of Jerusalem, or during the siege of Jerusalem. And while it's a wonderful book, it's also a horrible, terrible book to read. So Lamentations is about that period of time. And the Jewish people, by and large, not all of them, but most of them, were taken away and settled in other parts of Babylon's empire. Well, within a generation or so, by 540 or so, there got to be another big kid on the block, and that was Persia. And so Persia brought their armies against the armies of the Babylonians and beat them, and Babylonian empire was no more. So the king of Persia, anybody remember what his name was? Cyrus. Told the Jewish people that they could return. You pick that up in Isaiah chapter 40, where it's a song of joy. Your penalty has been paid. The Lord himself is going before you to take you home. But who all went? Surely not the whole people, because a generation had passed and people had done what the prophets told them they should do: marry, build farms, build vineyards, enjoy where you are. And they did. And so when Cyrus allowed the Jews to return, it was a remnant. Again, just a remnant of the former empire. Most of them stayed where they were. Whether it was Alexandria or some other ancient city, they had built businesses. They stayed where they were. So generations passed after that, and we finally get to Jesus' day. And in Jesus' day, Israel is a nation under occupation. They're still in exile. And at every point in between. When the Persians went away, the Greeks came. Alexander the Great built his empire, building with them as one of the building blocks. After Alexander's death, it went back and forth between the Ptolemies of Egypt and the Seleucids of northern Asia Minor, and they fought back and forth, so one or the other occupied Israel for the next few hundred years until finally the Romans came along and Rome took over. And they weren't a free nation then. There were no times, really, except a very brief time in the intertestamental period where you start talking about the Maccabeus brothers. There was no time in which Israel was not in exile or under occupation. Why? Does that sound like the Lord's blessing them in their land?
They were stiff-necked people.
Yeah. And so what happened?
So they were still in dispersion.
The Lord left them in exile. Now, there was quite a population by the time of Jesus' day, of course. And when Jesus lived, the Romans were the occupiers. And if you note, especially around Jerusalem, Rome did not practice what it practiced with most countries, where it just simply said, you can keep being king, just be loyal to me and pay me my tax every year. Israel never did that effectively. They were always in revolt, or seemingly always in revolt, and until finally Rome took away their ability to self-rule and put in a governor to be the ruler over Jerusalem and the former Judah, now Judea. So in Jesus' day, they were occupied. At every point in between, with the exception of the Maccabean period, they were occupied from the time of 600, 585 until Jesus' day, or near Jesus' day. Eventually, they did what they did with other nations. They revolted one more time. And Rome had had enough. Like it or not, Rome came in and did what the Babylonians had done 600 years before. Laid them waste. Destroyed the temple. The temple has not existed for more than 2,000 years. The central place of Jewish worship. Everything had to radically change after that. There was no more sacrifices to be made. No more of the priests that they'd had for all those thousands upon thousands of years. None of that. Their teaching places were synagogues. Their religious leaders eventually became spiritual guides and became rabbis. And they remained exiled until 1948. When Britain, who was basically holding that territory, Palestinian territory, decided to make Israel a nation and divide the land between Palestinians and the Jews. It wasn't long before war broke out again. And pretty much since 1948, Israel has been in some kind of military conflict or a war. It seems to me like about every 20 years there's a war, whether it's a 6-day war or whether it's longer, where they're fighting for their land, and Palestinians and Arabs who can't stand them are trying to get rid of them. So, who is Israel? Is it that nation, some of whom came through the Exodus and went into the land of promise and became part of a religious enterprise that could not be faithful to God? Always a remnant, but not most. So who are the ones who inherit the promise from Abraham that he will be the father of many nations? Paul answers that question. If you look at Romans, and this is just a couple of places where you can find it, there are many others, Romans 4:13 and 14, Paul says, the promise to Abraham that he would inherit the world did not come to his descendants through the law, but through the righteousness of faith. If it is adherents to the law who live, then faith is null and void. And then he goes on to say 9:6, not all Israelites truly belong to Israel. So who is the true Israel? The true covenant people? You are. The church. The church is the inheritor of the covenant that was made all those generations ago. And the remnant is not the remnant of Israel as a culture. It is, according to Paul, those who live by faith in Christ. Paul said in Galatians 5:6 and 7, Abraham believed God and it was accounted to him as righteousness. Those who believe are the descendants of Abraham. The true Israel is spiritual Israel. Now, if you ask me, do I believe that God has forgotten that particular people? No. And I don't, because Paul didn't. And while a lot of people express different opinions on these texts, I'd encourage you, if you have that question, to read Romans 9 through 11. And essentially what Paul says is they rejected God. So God let them do it. And gave the promise of the covenant to the Gentiles who were willing to receive it. Does that mean that God has forgotten his people? By no means, or God forbid. He doesn't know how, he doesn't know why, doesn't know when it's going to come to pass or anything like that, but he did basically say, I don't believe that God has left them. I believe that God somehow will bring them along. And in the end, before things are all done, a large remnant of fleshly Israel will come to Christ. That's his prophecy. But if you ask me,
Could you just repeat the words, a large what?
a remnant, leftover. So I was asked that question, and that's my answer. Any questions? All right.
So who was saying that, Paul?
Yeah, that we're the spiritual Israel. The church is. Mm-hmm.
So are there no more AKC registered Jews that all go to do?
As practitioners of a religion, as an ethnic group, certainly there are. I mean, that's evidenced every day. I mean, it's. I believe, if I remember my facts right, I believe within the first year of Israel's existence after 1948, that roughly 700,000 European Jews moved to Israel. So yeah, but I'm talking about who is the inheritor of the covenant? The church.
What do they believe?
Who?
The Israel people do.
Well, there are different branches of Judaism. Primarily, there's Orthodox, there's Reformed, and there's Conservative. The Orthodox are the ones that practice the old historical things that have been handed down, especially like with regard to the dietary laws. You know, they don't cook dairy and other things in the same pot. They have separate sinks, and so they follow all the rules. They practice all the festival days. Reformed Jews don't necessarily keep the dietary laws, and they do follow the calendar or the Jewish feast days, but not like they do in the Orthodox faith. I believe, if I remember right, the Reformed Jews do believe in life after death, as well as the Orthodox Jews. The conservative Jews are basically secular Jews that want to hold on to some kind of spirituality. They don't keep the dietary laws. They don't necessarily believe that there's even a God. You know, they're just their belief is in the rituals of ethnic Israel, and so that's what they practice.
But they don't believe in afterlife either.
No, they wouldn't.
Just the first is.
Mm-hmm.
What is the Messianic Jews?
Messianic Jews are Jews who have converted to Christianity. And I think there are several branches of it. I know of a couple of larger ones, but they're ethnic religious Jews who convert to Christianity. So there's many Messianic Jewish churches around. I know there's several in Memphis, if I remember right. I guess they're still there. Yeah, they're fewer in number, but they're there.
Was Gaza Strip, the territory of whatever it is, country, was it part of Israel at one time?
In the ancient time, it would have been part of it.
When did it split off?
Well, I mean, when Israel came back together as a nation in 1948, that was, if I remember right, the British gave what was the Gaza Strip and the Western Bank. That was to be Palestinian territory. But a lot's happened since Israel was formed. There have been a lot of wars and back and forth and peace accords and here and there. And, I think ultimately, if people, the terrorist groups or even other nations, so long as they believe Israel doesn't have a right to exist, there won't be peace. So, and Israel will fight fiercely, as they always have.
Well, were the Palestinians, were they part of the Jewish? They were Arabs. They were Arabs.
Yeah. Or partly Arab, anyway.
Who is
And when
Hamas?
Hmm?
Who is Hamas?
I don't know much about Hamas. It is at least according to our government, certainly labels it as a terrorist group. I think that, to me, that would indicate there's some kind of, pretty strong militia that can come together, and they don't fight fair. They go and, do things like they did.
It's backed by Iran, the country.
I'm sure it probably is.
Yeah,
But they're like the third tier down as far as terror, aren't they?
They're not as bad as some, but I mean, they did launch a, unprovoked attack on innocent people. So,
They're religious extremists, they think that
But I think
their religion tells them to kill it.
yeah, I don't think they're Islamic fundamentalists like ICE was and things like that. But they are, what we would consider to be a terroristic group, which basically means they fight guerrilla warfare. So,
I'm missing it, everybody in the room probably knows it, but why do people hate the Israelites so bad?
I don't know.
Everybody's out to,
Yeah.
they need to be wiped off the face.
Yeah, certainly there are people that believe that.
Is it just historical that they fought so long and they can't even remember now what it was?
I think more than anything else is just plain old prejudice. Especially among Orthodox groups, they tend to congregate together. They keep to themselves. They don't marry outside their own kind. They're isolated. They don't associate with the larger world. So, take two steps and you're at somebody who's willing to say, well, you're Christ killers. You don't belong in here. So,
The three Jewish groups that you spoke about first, do they believe in our God? I know they don't believe in Jesus Christ, but
Oh yeah, they believe in Jehovah. They don't believe in the Trinity. Yeah, they believe in the Father, but not the Trinity. So,
but the Arabs and all that, they've got a different God, whoever Allah is.
well, Allah is certainly different from what I believe God to be. So yeah, I say so. But don't get caught up on the word Allah though, because Christian Arabs also call God Allah. It's just simply the word for God. So when you hear that word Allah, it might be a Christian using it. So, be careful of, putting that kind of association with it. But yeah, if Muhammad's God is God, I don't want no part of it.
A few Sundays ago, you preached a sermon possibly on tithing, but part of your statement was that you pay unto Caesar that which is Caesar, and unto God that which is God.
Mhm.
That means that God wants countries, to me, that means that God wants countries to be established and to be lawful.
Yeah, I'd certainly say that's God's will.
And you've given us a great rundown on the biblical part of it. Now we've got country versus country and conflict of war,
Right.
which is I understand what's going on. I don't know what to think about some of it.
Yeah. Well, I will say, I've said it many, many times before, that there have been times that in things that I have read, stories that I've heard about how Israel has sometimes treated other people in its modern state. And I wonder, is this just a few generations away from the Holocaust? That they're doing to others the exact same thing that was done to them. But in their defense, I would say that if you as an ethnic religious group had lived through the Holocaust and finally got your own land again, 2,000 years later, in the same general area, even if there was going to be conflict there, they were going to give you the land, you'd jump at it. Of course they jumped at it. And therefore, they defend it fiercely. If you notice, Israel does not go off and start conflicts with other groups. Now, will they go bomb in another country? Yeah, if that other country has done something first. But they hadn't started any offensive wars. They just wanted to exist. But in order to exist, they had to become militarily strong. And then there has been violence and conflict over there constantly since 1948. Most of the time it's sporadic. It's groups like Hamas might throw a missile over into some place in Israel. And other times it's a full-fledged, let's line our armies up together and fight kind of situation, a true war.
And Hamas does not necessarily represent all the Palestinians.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
I mean, it's not really Palestinian, this is not. They had it and has been, but this is really Hamas.
Yeah.
And Israel.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is a critical distinction. I think if you ask most people, they want the same thing. They want a safe place to live, place to raise their families, place to work and be. They don't want, the average Palestinian probably does not want war, but or conflict. They want peace. But we both know that the average Joe and Jill could get along fine if we'd let them sit down and work things out. But when it gets to a place of national interest and jockeying and things like that, things can escalate really quickly. Anything else? All righty, thank you. Like I said, you don't have to agree with me. No, it won't. I will not lose one bit of sleep tonight. But if it's different from what you have thought, maybe it'll make you think some. If not, don't worry about it. Hopefully it will give you some food for thought. And thinking is never a bad thing, generally. So, thank y'all.